I'm Frank Gehry, and this is my masterclass. If you're building a building in the middle of a city, there is, I think, a responsibility to respect your neighbor like you would anyway. So architecturally respect your neighbor. If somebody looks at Disney Hall, they say, hell, you just ignored everything around it. What are you talking about respect? You just made a big shiny thing and it gives the finger to the chandler. But it doesn't. I mean, if you spend some time with it, as you come down Grand Avenue, the chandler curves. So I opened the curve to the entrance, and I was careful to do that. I made the new building out of smaller parts, so it wasn't one big building like the chandler. So it wasn't competing as a chandler. It had its own body language. And so those moves are very small in the scale, but they do count for a lot. In the tower I did in New York, I was next to the Woolworth building. The Woolworth building is a beautiful old building. I have a lot of respect for it. And so I didn't put a cap on it. I respect the Woolworth building has a beautiful sculptural cap on it, and I didn't want to mimic it. I wanted it to say, you got the hat, I'm respecting your seniority. And I think that kind of respect your neighbors architecturally is important to me. I looked at the material that was most used worldwide that everybody hated, and that was chain link fencing. And so I thought, okay, let me see if I can make something out of it that they'll like. Well, I got guffaws and everything for years. Today, even people who not really interested or intellectually involved, still look at it and say, oh, you're the chain link guy. A friend of mine built a tennis court. He made fun of me with chain link. I went to his house and he had a tennis court, which is surrounded in chain link, that you could see from every room of his house. He bought a fancy Bel Air mansion, and he was so proud of it. And he's the guy that made the most fun of me with chain link. And I went to look at it, and I said, gee, I'm sorry I converted you to that dastardly material. He said, what are you talking about? I said, that thing out there, that's chain link. He said, no, that's a tennis court. I was designing a entrance piece for a house I was doing in Ohio for a wealthy guy, a good friend. And when you see the final thing, you think it's a skull of a animal like a horse. And so we call it the horse's head. But when I was designing for this guy's house, and I didn't know it was a horse's head, and I didn't know it was going to look like that, I sort of was trusting my intuition to create something that was an ephemeral image in my mind that I couldn't quantify or draw. I could sketch and do things with it. But in this case, I tried to design it on the computer because I realized if we could do that, that would save a lot of time and effort and so on. So I sat in front of the computer with a computer guy who knew how to push the buttons because I didn't know how to do that. We clocked it. Somebody clocked it. It was 3.4 minutes when I got up and ran out screaming and couldn't stand it anymore because the disconnect between the dream image and the images on the computer, which are dried out and lifeless and inhumane and what else, they're just geometry and drawings and they don't have the human touch. The difference was so wide, the gulf was so wide, and I was trying to connect them in my head, and I couldn't hold it for longer than 3.4 minutes. I got up and went out screaming. I said, "Don't do this to me again." I think the human contact, the sketch, the hand-eye coordination, the machine on its own will eliminate the humanity, left to its own devices. A friend of mine did the Piero della Francesca from Arezzo, the frescoes, and she spent 10 years putting that information in the computer so they could reproduce the frescoes electronically with all of the humanity and feeling of Piero della Francesca's hand and eye and motion and all the things that went with him producing that painting. If you circumvent all that stuff and just go computer to construction, you eliminate the human touch. And it's subtle, I think. And you see a lot of it. We're going more and more that way. The buildings are becoming even more faceless and less inviting the nice thing is they put trees all over them, so that helps. And people still laugh and cry and act up, and so you can't eliminate that yet. There is one thing that a teacher told me. I think I've mentioned this earlier somewhere. He took me aside and he said, "I've been watching you and you're really talented." And that was the first time anybody said that to me, by the way. And that took me by surprise. But he said that, and he said, "Promise me that whatever you do going forward, no matter how small it is, whatever project you make or build or design, make sure it's the best you could possibly do for that work. You're judged always by each step along the way." That was a big deal for me, and I've never forgotten it. And I've lived by that. So even when I was in the Army and I was designing field latrines for maneuvers in the swamps of Louisiana, I was seriously designing, and the Army couldn't care less but I made it a serious thing. I really worked hard, and I'm proud of those field latrines. I don't know if the general ever used them, but it was the best I could do. Knowing when you're done maybe is the hardest thing. It's a self-editing process that requires an understanding of all of the other issues. So you accept a schedule when you start a project. So when you get to that date, you're done. But having that in mind as you work, and you're working to that schedule, it kind of sets you up for knowing when you're done, because you know that going past that date is going to be a difficulty for the other members of your team, the people who are paying for it. The house we're doing now in Atherton, we set a done date, and it's tough. And the client is demanding a done date, and we're respecting that. It's a reasonable done date. If you get to the done date and the building isn't what you want, you would pray to the client and say, "Please give me another week," or something. "I'm almost there." I mean, I've had that happen, where you're almost there but not there, and you want to just beg for a little more time. I think it's healthy to have a done date, because otherwise you'll go on forever. And I've seen that happen with young people sometimes don't have the discipline. In my case, I was drafted into the Army. I spent 2 years being disciplined. I think it was a healthy thing to have happen, probably. So everybody joined the Army. I never know they're going to be a success, and I never presume they are. But I try to make them a success. The Basque people that I met with when I was hired to do Bilbao was the mayor, the president of Basque region, the minister of commerce, the minister of culture, the minister of education, and the Guggenheim director. And I was asked if I could make a building that would have the same effect on Bilbao as the Sydney Opera House had on Sydney, Australia. And I looked at them and I said, wow, that's a big order. I said, look, I'll try my best. I don't know what that means. I'll do my best. So I didn't know that it was going to work out. I'm still I listen to all the success stories. I don't dine out on it. When people ask about it, I talk about it. Or when I get pushed in a corner and about what I'm doing, and I can refer to it. I bring that to my defense sometimes. But I think you should aim for success. You should aim for, those are client requests. I mean, those guys really asked me for that. And I looked at them and I said, you gotta be kidding. It's like, who do you think I am? But I'll do my best, that's all you can say. The gods were with us and it happened. But I think there's a certain degree of naivete that to be told that and look at them and say, okay, I'm going to try. And you think, and you leave that room and you think, oh my God, what am I going to do now? Because you're taking on a kind of an impossible responsibility that you can't guarantee. And how dare them ask you to do that? They know it's inhuman. There's all kinds of feelings that come with that moment. And you want to go home, crawl under the covers and hide. I think there's an expectation from the client that right now, because of my career, the past, that when they come, they expect that kind of reaction or response. You have to maintain a level of optimism that you're going to be able to pull it off. You're going to be able to create the building that they expect and exceed their expectation and meet their. I mean, you have to approach it with that optimism and sense of responsibility that goes with it, I think. But I love that. I love that space. I've come to love that space.